kind of choppy coming back to the book of Genesis. We've had a week on and a week off for a few weeks, which is pretty unusual for us because we don't have guest speakers super frequently, and then those guest speakers don't always use the Sunday school hour as well as the regular morning service. And so having 4 weeks where it was kind of, we're doing our regular Sunday school and then we're doing a different Sunday school and then our regular Sunday school and a different Sunday school makes it a little harder to kind of recalibrate each time, if you will. And so that's a little bit challenging for me. I hope it's not for you. I hope maybe that's a unique problem for me. But if we want to think back a little bit to what we reviewed a couple weeks ago, we were talking about Jacob and his family arriving in Egypt. And certainly we see the providence of God in making that way for them, that they could be protected from the consequences of this famine, placing Joseph in this position of power, setting up. We talked to some extent about how Joseph's actions during the famine likely set Egypt up to become the world power that it will be in later to them, ancient times to us. And certainly if we think about the way the nation of Egypt is going to progress into the country that is the country of the Pharaoh that Moses is going to be dealing with, and Moses and the children of Israel, who are kind of the first recipients of these writings as Moses is writing them, the Egypt that they know. Egypt during this time, the Pharaoh did not have the same kind of power that he'll have in later Egyptian times. Joseph brought that to him. Joseph managed the affairs of his king, this Pharaoh, in such a way that the Pharaoh's power was greatly enhanced over the people. And then in the 400 years that intervene here, roughly between this time and the time of Moses, the nation of Egypt is going to go to war against these Canaanite nations. Other things are going to happen that are going to bring Egypt into prominence, that's going to endure throughout ancient times as we read through Scripture. So we talked a good deal about that. Jacob, of course, he comes down to Egypt with his sons. He adopts the sons of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, as his own, and he prescribes his own blessings to them, a direct blessing to them. And in that way, Joseph, though being one of the youngest children, gets a double portion of the inheritance through his children. And we talked a bit about the blessings that were given by Jacob there to Manasseh and Ephraim. Certainly those two tribes become very influential throughout the history of Israel. You'll see those names come up a great deal. And it may kind of surprise you if you're not proactively thinking about it when you read those lists of tribes, and oftentimes you don't hear the name of Joseph mentioned, and maybe you scratch your head a little bit and you think to yourself, oh wait, wasn't there this guy Joseph? He was a son of Israel, right? And that's because he's being mentioned by proxy through his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, who are often mentioned. As we come here to the end of the book of Genesis, there's really a couple of major events that are closing out the book of Genesis. And we're going to spend, I suspect, all of our time today on one of those events. And then next week, we will close out the book of Genesis with the passing of Jacob and Joseph and those very final events that set the stage for the times of the Exodus in the following book. Today, we're really going to focus on chapter 49. This is where Jacob brings together his children. He's preparing for his passing. He's already given instructions to Joseph about, hey, I'm getting ready to pass. I want to give these blessings to your sons. But now he gathers all of his sons together and prepares to give them some blessings, some prophecies. And he recognizes that the words that he's sharing are not just his words. We read in chapter 49, verse 1, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. And Jacob then begins to go through the line of children, pronouncing blessings, though sometimes they sound like curses, upon each of these children. And as folks who have read the back of the book, we can certainly see some connections in how those prophecies are fulfilled through the lives of these children. Now, it's worth noting, before we talk about each one, that this is the first time in the lives of the patriarchs where all of the sons are together. Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael, they were separated during the life of Abraham and kind of had to go their own ways and start their own nations. Jacob and Esau, they were separated during the life of Isaac and placed roots in other places. They were divided. But here we see Jacob as the first patriarch. Thank you so much. Jacob here is the first patriarch, all of whose children are here united together, listening to the words of their father, worshiping their father's God. This despite the fact that if you remember from the passage about Judah and Tamar, that Judah had kind of separated himself from his brothers. He had gone, he'd moved a ways away. So they weren't all entirely united in the land of Canaan, and yet here God has brought them all together as they listen to Jacob's words. And so Jacob begins to pronounce these prophecies of the futures of his children. So we're gonna go right down the list and discuss each one, some a little more exhaustively than others, because there's a lot more said about them. But much for us to learn through these events. Verse 3, chapter 49, verse 3, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Now, if there's anything we have learned as we've studied the lives of the patriarchs, it's the emphasis on firstborn children. So as we read this first verse, we wouldn't be particularly surprised at this very glowing beginning to the discussion of the firstborn. And yet, verse 4, unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defiledst thou it. He went up to my couch. So Reuben, we had read earlier and discussed earlier, Reuben had been in an incestuous relationship with his father's concubine, Bilhah. And it was called out as a statement, as a mention, but it's very clear here that Jacob was aware of it. He really didn't address it. It seems like that's water under the bridge and the family has moved on, but Jacob remembers this fact and as a result is effectively taking away the benefits of the firstborn child, the blessing of the firstborn from Reuben, who would be the natural recipient of it. And so here we see combined, unlike other scenarios in Scripture, Reuben is not disowned. He's still a son of Jacob. He is still here, and he's still honored. Jacob has good things to say about him. My might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, the excellency of power. Your state, Reuben, is that you have so much going for you. And yet, as I tell you about things that'll happen in the last days, you're unstable as water. You won't excel because you committed this sin. And so the promise, the blessing, the benefit of being the firstborn is removed from you. Now, in the order of the times, this blessing and curse would beg the question, well, who gets that? Well, the secondborn, right? Verse 5, Simeon and Levi. So he addresses both the second and thirdborn together. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret. Unto their assembly, mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So the second and third born would have naturally been next in line to receive those blessings that were denied to Reuben. And yet it's denied to them because of the events dealing with Shechem. We talked about those really extensively. We're not gonna dive super deep into them before, but in the matter of Dinah, Simeon and Levi basically deceived a whole group of people and then went through and wiped out a whole city. And it's clear from this passage, at the time, Jacob had said, basically, hey guys, what are you doing? Everyone is going to hate us when they hear about this. We are going to stink to the people in the land here because we've done this injustice upon these people. And that's really all that's said about Jacob's response. But here we see in this passage, he seems to be proclaiming his innocence and ignorance of this whole plan. Other people might have accused him and said, hey, you know, that family of Israel, look at what they did. Jacob here seems to be protesting, hey, the secrets, the things that were going on in these guys' hearts, I did not know anything about this. I did not know what was going on here, but because of your cruelty, your anger, your wrath, and the way you handled that, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now, of course, the family of Levi, which will also be the family of Moses and Aaron, will become the priestly class. And they will not have any inheritance in Israel as far as the physical land, with the exception of cities that are spread throughout the congregation. They will not be given a single location in Israel that is their inheritance like most of the other tribes. Simeon will be relegated to a fairly small section of Israel that is entirely encompassed by Judah, within the land of Judah. Interestingly, Levi's curse, as you would read it here, really becomes a blessing, in part because of their zealousness in judging the people and responding to the events of the golden calf. In their establishment as the priestly class, they're going to be protectors of the word of God, of the worship of God in Israel. And they really embrace that role and serve the Lord in the process of being spread throughout the land. Yeah, Don. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I read somewhere, so what Don pointed out was that it seems that throughout the progression of the Exodus and relocation to the Promised Land, that they start out being very large and they're diminished over time. I had read, but I didn't really have time to dig super deeply into it, that there's some like historical commentary that the people of Simeon would eventually become like a teaching educational class, and that teachers from Simeon would go throughout the land of Israel and be used to teach people, and they would be spread out in that way. But I wouldn't like preach that as the book, because I don't think that's in the book. I think that's more like a historical commentary kind of thing. But regardless, these groups are spread out through the land to disperse this perceived wrath, violence, destructive nature that they have. And that largely ties to these events with the dealings of the Shechemites. So verse 8. So we've progressed through the children. We had Reuben, we had Simeon, we had Levi, and yet because of these extreme defects in these first three children, we now find where that blessing of the firstborn is going to fall in Judah. Verse 8, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. From the blessing bestowed upon him, it is clear that the excellence denied to Reuben as firstborn is fallen upon Judah. He's promised in this passage success in war, leadership of the people, economic prosperity, a royal heritage. Certainly we see in this promise of a lawgiver until Shiloh come, we see this promise of the Messiah who will come of the line of Judah. Shiloh, the word that's translated Shiloh, could be read, he whose right it is. This key figure, this look forward to the Messiah. Judah, of course, provided kings to the people up to the time of the Babylonian captivity. They provided governors in the times after the Babylonian captivity. Their role in leading the people was heavily established. Of course, once the kingdom was split, Judah retained that line of David, that kingly royal line that the Messiah would come from. They were large both in their dominance of the land and in their population, and their ability to be a leader for all Israel and present the protection of the temple and of right religious practice. It's interesting to note that prior to Christ's crucifixion, the people will cry out in condemning Christ, "We have no king but Caesar." And shortly thereafter, in 70 AD, the temple will be destroyed, and the priestly leadership will be ended and scattered. And since that time, there has been no lawgiver in Israel, according to the line of Judah, right? That function of having a lawgiver, of having leadership within the land, really ended right at the time of Christ, and functionally has never been reestablished. Judah's role, both as providing the generic leadership of the nation, as well as the specific leadership of delivering the promise of the Messiah and taking that blessing that was promised through the patriarchs, is called out here in the blessing that Jacob pronounces, this promise of future times. Now, with these four children, all taken together, as we took them in order, Jacob has assigned the most important element of his blessings, the birthright and the blessing of the firstborn. These other children who are going to be mentioned, they are largely, their blessings are largely concerned with their inheritances and their character. But we'll see prophetic things about the nature of them as well. The next child mentioned is Zebulun. Zebulun, verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. This speaks predominantly to the inheritance that they're given in Joshua chapter 19, where it's specifically called out that their inheritance, though really kind of inland from the sea, goes up to it, into that area of Zidon. Matthew Henry points out that if the circumstances of the assignments of these inheritances by Joshua had been done by the people, if all the people got together and kind of voted on how this stuff should be done and made a selection, you might say, well, obviously they chose this area for Zebulun because of this prophecy. They were kind of like making all things fit together. But that's not how the assignment was done. It was done by lot. And we see the providential workings of God and the prophetic use of Jacob in making this connection. The next son mentioned is Issachar. Issachar, verse 14, is a strong ass couching between two burdens. And he saw, that first verse sounds kind of rough for Issachar, right? Man, you're going to be working hard like a donkey. That doesn't sound like super. I don't know that that's the blessing I would pick if I was given a choice. But verse 15 says, and he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. The promise, the blessing here is that Issachar, the prophecy, is that the people of Issachar will lead lives of husbandry, of agriculture, of the land, of the homestead. This tribe is not frequently mentioned in Scripture, really outside of the numberings or census type events. But there is a really interesting mention of them that's notable because there are so few in 1 Chronicles chapter 12. And even though we're short on time, I'm going to turn there real quick. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, because you read a passage like this and you think, well, man, you guys, you kind of got the short end of the stick here. Like, you're going to be homebodies and you're going to take care of the house. And that may seem kind of weak sauce after you've read about Judah and you're going to read about Joseph and so forth. But there's a lot to be said for hearth and home. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, that section discusses the warriors that are sent to support David when he is appointed king in Hebron. And in chapter 12 and verse 32, Issachar gets mentioned. And it's in the context of he's mentioning all these groupings of people and like the armies that they sent to Hebron to support David. So this tribe, they sent 4,000 people. And this tribe, they sent 8,000 armed, ready for war. Well, what gets said about Issachar? And of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, the heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. So can you imagine King David is about to be crowned in Hebron, and these armies of loyalty, because remember, we're kind of subduing the kingdom that was under Saul, right? There are all these people who are still trying to follow the house of Saul, and there's division in the kingdom, and things are just kind of coalescing around David now. These tribes are all sending their armies down to Hebron to pledge loyalty to King David, and big group, 8,000 people show up, right? That's a big crew of people coming through. And someone's like, hey, where's the people from Issachar? There are 200 men. But you know what? There are 200 men who have understanding, who know what Israel ought to do. And all their brethren are at their commandment. These people were able to send a small delegation because everybody was behind them. Hey, we don't need to send you 8,000 people, David. We'll send you 200 of our leaders, of our elders, and they speak for us, and they got it covered. We're taking care of hearth and home here. That's a pretty huge blessing, right? We tend to read these numbers and think about things, but this was a very agricultural society. And 8,000 people wandering off, 8,000 men of war leaving to go do something, that's pretty hard on a lot of families in this time. These people, they had a good blessing. They had much to be thankful for. All right, moving right along. Dan, verse 16 of chapter 49. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. It's possible the blessing that is provided here to Dan is a reference, at least in part, to a very famous Danite named Samson, who saw victory over the Philistines not through the outright wars of many of the other judges, but through harassment, unpredictability, and artifice. You know, when you read through the judging of Samson, he judged Israel for 20 years, and his conflicts with the Philistines were very on again, off again. You remember him setting the foxes' tails on fire and running them through the fields there, marching up and taking the gates of the city and walking away with them when they were trying to capture him. Of course, Samson and Delilah is a story everybody knows from Sunday school. His interactions with the Philistines very much might make one think of a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels so that his rider fall backward, right? This is not the courageous frontal assault of the lion. This is kind of the more subtle, sinister enemy, the serpent. Gad, a troop shall overcome. Of course, we know from our study of the children as they were being born that when Gad was born, his mother said, "A troop cometh." His name, Gad, meaning a troop. So Jacob kind of references that in his prophecy here. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. Gad, in his inheritance, would receive the borderlands on the east side of Jordan, and therefore would be constantly subjected to battles with the Ammonites and the Canaanites in that area. Those peoples would be overcome later in the time of the judges, but a lot of battle in Gad's future. Asher is given a short blessing. In verse 20, out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. He's promised not only the bread that sustains, that allows for life to continue, but bounty beyond that. Royal dainties, the comfort foods that we all enjoy, the baked mac and cheese of the ancient world, burgers and fries, whatever your preferred dainties are. Asher is well provided for. Naphtali, he says in chapter 20, or verse 21 rather, Naphtali is a hind let loose. He giveth goodly words. You know, this seems a stark contrast to the other warriors mentioned here. The deer's defense mechanism is flight, not fight, right? The hind or a deer doesn't attack enemies head on, right? They're built for leaving. And a notable member of the tribe of Naphtali, who maybe exemplifies this, is Barak. If you remember, he needed Deborah to kind of goad him along to get the job done. He wasn't necessarily ready to go to war at the outset, but in Judges 5, we read the victory song of Deborah and Barak. And so in Barak's example, it certainly seems like he was finally successful, and he had goodly words. He was able to write a good song, he and Deborah, in honoring the victory that God had given them in that situation. And then, of course, Joseph. So Joseph, representative of two tribes, receives additional blessings to those that were given to Manasseh and Ephraim previously in chapter 48. For sake of time, we won't dive into super deep detail. But in verse 22, Jacob says, Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him, but his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Jacob, in this prophecy and blessing, reminds Joseph that although he is fruitful and successful now, he was terribly attacked and tormented. He went through trials and difficulties to arrive where he is at. And he did so through the strength of God, the God that they serve together and worship together. Jacob acknowledges the support of the Almighty upon Joseph, and of the blessings, the full and complete blessings that Joseph will enjoy. He says the blessings of heaven above, those divine blessings, the blessings of the deep that lie under, the earth, the land, economic blessings, if you will, blessings of the breast and of the womb, of having people, of new life, of populace. The tribes of Manasseh specifically would be very large and would encompass a great deal of the land of Israel. If you remember, Manasseh was that tribe that almost got themselves into a great deal of trouble because Ephraim, the half-tribes of Manasseh were split in that some of them chose to take inheritances east of Jordan and some of them west of Jordan. And so there was almost some conflict in Israel because of that. And the inheritance of the tribe of Manasseh would really spread across Israel, kind of east to west, as they grew over time. Very bountiful tribes here out of Jacob. Jacob closes his blessings, and it's a little bit of a surprise because having just come out of the reuniting of Joseph and his brethren, you know that there are two comparatively young sons of Jacob and Rachel that were beloved by Jacob. And so you read this about Joseph, and of course, you're not surprised, right? Jacob loved Joseph, and Joseph served the Lord and did all these things. So there's lots to be said about him. And then you're ready for Benjamin, and you get verse 27, one short verse. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Seemingly a blessing of success, right? That he will defeat others, that he will enjoy the spoil, the catch what you kill experience, or eat what you kill experience, rather. But pretty short. If we think about the tribe of Benjamin, though, Benjamin really gets a lot of airtime in terms of famous Benjamites, as well as its involvement in the national politics, though being a small tribe throughout most of its time. If we think about famous Benjamites, ones we might know, we might certainly think of Ehud, the judge, Saul, pretty famous Benjamite there, Esther, Mordecai, Paul, all of the tribe of Benjamin. Certainly, Benjamin had a rich history of leadership, of active engagement with the politics of Israel. Benjamin would later be closely allied with Judah and would enjoy the spoils of war along with Judah. One might think that given Jacob's affection for Benjamin, that we'd get a similarly long and flowing line of blessings for Benjamin. But this blessing is its own reward. We see here the fulfillment through Benjamin and through what the future holds for Benjamin of the divine prophetic nature of what Jacob is saying, that these words aren't just Jacob's own preferences. This isn't, hey boys, I hope good things for you. But here he is led by the Holy Spirit and shown the things of God and what God has for these children who he will form out of Egypt, out of a family in Egypt, into a great nation that'll be a blessing to the whole world, not only through the very obvious promise of the Messiah, but also through what Paul will talk about in the Jews being the holders of the oracles of God, the protectors of the scriptures throughout the world, so that even to this very day, we enjoy the blessings of being able to read the words of God preserved for us. Church family, there is a lot to be said about Jacob and the blessings he's pronounced here, and certainly time could be spent going into greater detail. But I hope that even this very brief, abbreviated discussion whets your appetite. You know, sometimes we go through a passage like this and we kind of just tick off the boxes, right? Yep, kid 1, this is going to happen. Yep, kid 2, this is going to happen. We draw some very clear analogies and then we walk away. But there is a lot to chew on in this passage about Jacob and his blessings upon his children. And I hope you'll continue to do that as you read through this passage this week. Next week, we will get through the rest of chapter 49 and the closing of chapter 50 and close out the book of Genesis. So read those as well. Let's close with a word of prayer.